How about the, oh, all right. This your time. You ready? Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Sounds really loud. Is it really loud to you all? Okay. So thank you all for coming today. Just to make sure you know where you are, this is how can broadband meet the needs of a post-pandemic world? Um, I'm Caroline Luxoy. I'm a project manager in the Office of Broadband at DHCD, and our speaker today is a colleague of mine, also within the Office of Broadband at DHCD, Chandler Vaughn. He's our policy analyst. Some real quick housekeeping before I let Chandler take over. Excuse me. Because this is a hybrid conference, and I know that this is probably like the 10th time you've heard this, if you are joining us virtually, please feel free to enter your questions as we go along. For those of you attending in person, we'll hold all questions until Chandler is done. And I think that's it. I think I was joking with Chandler because Governor Northam kind of stole his thunder a little bit at lunch and kind of stole all the juicy stuff about broadband in Virginia within the past year, but I hope there's still a little bit of meat on that bone. All right, take it away.
Thanks, Caroline. And again, I'm Chandler Vaughn, and I'm the only thing standing in between you and happy hour. So I'm going to keep that in mind as we go throughout the presentation. Just want to do some housekeeping things, like Caroline said before. It's my hope that this is really interactive. From folks online, folks in person. If you have a question midway through the presentation, throw a hand up and let's unpack it. So as we go throughout, I want this to feel really laid back. And have a conversation as we go through. We're going to start off with an activity, pretty non-typical of what we've seen, I think, so far, but that's not an activity of getting up and moving out of your seat, so don't worry, get comfortable, because this is where we'll be for 30 minutes or so. But like Caroline was saying, this session is about how broadband can meet the needs of a post-pandemic world. We were talking about this as an office, this presentation, before we submitted the topic to the Governor's Housing Conference. And 2 years ago, this panel might have had to be an argument for why we need ubiquitous access to broadband across the state of Virginia. And today, it's more so, how do we finish the job of making sure everybody has access to broadband, and then talk about two other issues that are equally as important, but have yet to be fully addressed by the state and federal government. So I want to talk about access to broadband, the thing we're working on now, but also broadband affordability and adoption later on down the road. So here's the activity. I've tried to prep some folks around the room, but hopefully everybody has a piece of paper and something to write with. We give piece of paper and something to write with. And folks online, please join in with this as well on the closest doodle pad, sticky note, anything. Something to write with and a piece of paper. So can I get a thumbs up from everybody in here when we've got that? Excellent. I think we're good to go now. All right, so on that piece of paper, things are going to pop up on the screen here that I'd like you to draw. 3 squares. Once we've got 3 squares, let's go ahead and put down 4 rectangles. For the folks online, I'm not watching you, but I hope you're also joining in on this as well. Next, after the rectangles, 1 large triangle. After the triangle, one small circle. Two more things. One trapezoid. We're getting more difficult now. Pretty much a rectangle with one long side and one short side with two diagonal lines. I had to look that up to make sure I was saying the shape was the right name, so don't take offense to that. And then the last thing, the letter T. I'm going to assume once everybody's heads are back up that we're done with all of those 6 items. So how many of our drawings look like this? Can we, yeah, in the back, yeah, exactly like this, yeah. Can we show our artwork off around the room for everybody, for anybody that's comfortable with that? Show it to our neighbors, show it to folks around the room. How close were we? All right, so let's unpack this and inviting crowd participation here. So why doesn't what we wrote down look like what's on the screen? Just shout it out to me. Right, I didn't say connect them. I could have been more specific about the number of squares. What else? Take it out on me, guys. Like, you're not gonna hurt my feelings. Why doesn't what we have on paper look like what's on the screen? Didn't give directions. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right on. So I want to take this experience, frustrating experience where we didn't know what the end goal was, and apply it to broadband. So again, let's hear it from folks out in the audience. I mean, how does this experience relate to those without broadband at home? Yeah, absolutely, left out. What else? Yeah, absolutely. Don't know what's available out there, don't have the right tools to complete the job, and just feel left behind because we don't have the ability to keep up and know what the end goal is in the modern world. So last question here. What are some of the real world consequences of folks left behind without broadband? Say that again? At a disadvantage, how so? Lack of knowledge? Yeah, disconnected, but disconnected from what? You know, what are some of the things that folks can't get access to at home because they don't have access to broadband? Sure, communication with family, absolutely. Healthcare, school, work, for sure. How would we get connected over the last 15, 16 months if we didn't have a good connection at home? So, I mean, we've just walked through essentially, you know, the need for broadband access, affordability, and understanding, and why that's important for folks around the Commonwealth. You know, and that's what we were relating back to at the beginning was that, you know, 2 years ago this conversation would have been why do people need access to broadband, but now thankfully we can talk to and be solution oriented and see how can we fix this problem. So as the slide said at the beginning, we're going to go through 3 topic areas: access, affordability, and adoption. The first problem, access, is what Caroline hinted to earlier about what Governor Northam was talking about today over lunch. It's the problem that Virginia has been focused on over the last 5 years now, starting with a $1 million budget for grants to public-private partnerships through the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative program. Thankfully, through the state grant programs and federal programs, we've been able to close half the digital divide around broadband access in Virginia over the last 5 years. And the problem, it persists because of a simple math problem where internet service providers are not willing to build out on their own dimes in areas where homes are not densely populated, right? They're simply just not the return on investment when you have 2 or 3 miles between each home, as opposed to what you might have in a downtown city area or even a suburb. And then we just talked about too the impetus to solve the problem from all those angles. Economic, you know, folks can't access the 21st century economy without access to broadband. Education, of course, we've seen that unfortunately, with school children over the last year. And lastly, health, which is self-explanatory as we see more folks and hope to see more folks aging in home. So the broadband goal, the original goal was universal coverage no later than 2028. And in 2018, that was a pretty doggone ambitious goal to say we're going to have universal coverage in Virginia within 10 years. This past summer, with the American Rescue Plan funding, State Fiscal Recovery Fund, and Capital Projects Fund, Governor Northam and the General Assembly allocated an additional $700 million to the effort to make sure folks that don't have a cable running in front of their house or fiber optics running in front of their house or a fixed wireless signal beaming through the air, that they will have access to one of those things in broadband no later than 2024. And we're on track to meet that effort. The primary avenue that's been happening through, yeah, we got a question in the back. Yep. So for folks online, the question was, there's 233,500 remaining unserved locations. What do we consider as a location? And primarily that's going to be homes in rural areas where it's just they're sparsely populated. They could also be home-based businesses in areas. You know, we'll get back into it on the next slide, but our grant program will award more points to project areas that include more home-based businesses, community anchor institutions. I mean, we're talking rescue squads, public libraries, any community anchor institution, business home out there that doesn't have access to broadband. Yeah, it's a housing unit. Yeah, yeah. So the way that we're doing this is through the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative. We can talk about some statistics of what we've seen over the last round. We announced the $750 million in funding available. We received $943 million in requests. So I think that's quick math would be almost 200 million oversubscribed, requesting almost 200 million over what's available for this review period. The important thing to note here, and I think the thing that might get left behind, is that one of the ways to participate in our grant programs is to submit a notice of application, just a formal statement that you are going to apply for grant funding. Every city and county in the Commonwealth that has unserved areas remaining in them submitted a notice to apply to our grant programs. And the success rate on that for folks that actually ended up submitting an application was over 95%. So almost everybody has broadband at the top of their priority list. They're devoting staff time to it to put in grant applications to our office. So let's pivot here to the broadband affordability problem. To be upfront, this is the harder nut to crack on the other side of the digital divide. We're cooking, we're pushing forward on all fronts when it comes to broadband access through the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, other grant programs. But the harder thing to address is broadband affordability. There's about 1.5 million, depending on how you define it, individuals around Virginia that are low to moderate income that could benefit from a broadband affordability effort. So the Commonwealth on our side, we've convened a working group to discuss the broadband affordability problem, but there's also existing federal programs out there that we're going to talk about, as well as a state framework that's currently under a pilot program now, up for consideration from the General Assembly in the coming General Assembly session. So existing federal programs, again, hang with me here because we want to talk about 3 different subsidy programs. The most historical one is a Lifeline program. That was originally designed, I think, in the 1980s to be a subsidy for phone bill payments, right? And you can see by the amount of benefit that is, you can see why in 1980 that might have made sense for a phone bill payment. $9.25 a month that people can apply also now, since 2016, to the cost of broadband services at home. Thankfully, there's been a recent push on 2 other programs to boost that subsidy. The first was instituted in that Consolidated Appropriations Act. It was that stimulus package in December of last year, kind of the one that got sandwiched in between the other 2 and got forgotten a little bit, but the Consolidated Appropriations Act included the emergency broadband benefit, a $50 per month subsidy for households during the pandemic emergency period. It was designed to be a program that would only be in place while COVID was happening. Unfortunately, we're still there, or until the funding ran out for the program. We want to talk about a couple of flaws there, and I think that this is important for us to realize as a housing community, to help folks navigate the challenges that we've seen through this program. The emergency broadband benefit and what's been proposed with the affordable connectivity program, both of those programs are provider centric, meaning that the individual, the homeowner, must go through that broadband provider to access that benefit. It's not necessarily through a government program. They can't work with a local DSS office to access that. They've got to be able to go through, talk to that provider, see if they're even participating, like if a Comcast, for example, is participating in the program, and then if they are, they have to check their eligibility, and then hopefully they still qualify and can apply that benefit on to them at the end of the day. That has been a $50 a month subsidy, $75 on tribal lands. And it's been re-upped, refunded, but unfortunately the benefit has decreased in the new infrastructure package that was just released. The final bill at least has been sent to the president's desk, I believe, over the last 7 days. That takes it down from $50 a month to $30 a month. I'm sure folks have a broadband subscription in the room. $30 a month might not cover the cost of broadband services for too many folks out there. So obvious things to address there with the Affordable Connectivity Program that's still structured to run through the internet service provider. So we want to talk a little bit about the state framework that is out there currently as a plan, a pilot program to help meet those gaps in federal subsidies. So this past General Assembly session, one of the special sessions, the Chief Broadband Advisor and the Department of Social Services were directed to work together to design a proposal to help meet that affordability gap around the Commonwealth, because there's challenges in folks getting registered for federal programs, and also there's a bit of a gap to fill too from that $50 or $30 subsidy to get up to what broadband services actually cost. So the enabling budget language directs DSS to set up a pilot program that has up to a $15 per month reimbursement. Of course, that's not meant to be the only source of funding for those. It's also meant to leverage federal programs that they can pull down as well for currently participating SNAP eligible households. Those payments are structured as a direct reimbursement to the broadband provider, but most importantly, it takes the individual into account where they can choose and select and see what options are in their area to subscribe to, and then puts them in the driver's seat rather than having to go through the administrative process of figuring out how they can register for the program and if they can even register. And then lastly, to make sure that folks that we're getting contributions on all sides, that program, it's mandatory that broadband provider offers a low-cost broadband service option for low-income residents in that service area. So again, taking the federal programs, the federal subsidies, and applying to them to this state framework, we believe is a good solution for helping meet the short-term needs of broadband affordability. But there's also been some movement around long-term solutions as well. The governor in the CARES Act approved $30 million for last mile broadband expansion. And then the thing I want to focus on are the 5 affordability projects that were also approved through these funds. And I think that's what folks are going to be most interested here as well. I want to highlight 2 of them. The first is in the city of Martinsville, received CARES Act funding, contributed some of their own CARES Act funding to leverage fiber that the city already owned, fiber optic cable running under the ground, to then put up cell tower sites to have a fixed wireless broadband option for low-income housing in pockets around the city of Martinsville. So we saw that as a solution to where Martinsville, thankfully, had some telecommunication expertise already on staff, and they were able to set up that system, help meet the needs of folks in the short term and now as well in the long term by having that fixed wireless solution, leveraging what the city already owned for fiber optic cable. The second is in Arlington. Arlington worked with a housing developer to launch also a fixed wireless service through 5G to be able to have low-income options for consumers in Arlington as well. So we're seeing folks, approach the subsidy model where folks are going to federal programs, having dollars contributed to their monthly broadband bill, but also solutions where cities are standing up their own infrastructure to help provide that low-cost service, as well as working with providers in the area to do that as well. Yeah, sure thing. Sure. So the question was, fixed wireless. What does that mean? Because we were talking about that in light of the two affordability projects in Martinsville and Arlington. Fixed wireless is just a different way to deliver broadband service to a home, right? So broadband could either be a wireline connection or a wireless connection. Could be fiber optic cable, a TV cable at your house, but it also could be wireless signal going through the air, beamed from a tower. Um, so yeah, that's just the way they chose to deploy broadband in those. Right, fiber's a wire, fixed wireless is coming off a tower. Yeah, yeah, in the back. So the question was, different localities have different demands when it comes to broadband speeds. Has that conversation come into any of these projects as well? And I would say that, in a lot of times, the regulations on these, whatever rules are promulgated based upon the federal infrastructure packages have different speed requirements attached to them, right? And that really drives the implementation of some of these projects. So, for example, American Rescue Plan funds require that at the point of construction, those funds must provide access to broadband at speeds of 100 megabits download, 20 megabits upload. What that means in normal terms is, well over 10 Zoom streams running at the same time simultaneously. For example, and then the American Rescue Plan is 100 over 20. The new federal infrastructure bill and Jobs Act, that's also 100 over 20 in implementation, but it must be scalable to 100 symmetrical. So when it comes to speeds, usually the source of funding drives the implementation of whatever that is. Also in the back.
Since you brought that up, with the hotspot and Wi-Fi, what type of security taken into consideration with especially the hotspot and Wi-Fi when you got public Wi-Fi or somebody pulling up there, especially doing that and start hacking stuff with public Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi.
Yep, so the question was, how is security taken into account when you have these public networks? What would stop somebody from hacking into a publicly owned network to access other folks that may be using that as a low-income solution? And honestly, we usually see that implemented at the project level where the IT staff in a city or county will look at that and see if it's up to their standards and go from there. We'll work with a community to make sure that those securities are in place, but happy to get back with you on that to see how that's happening in the field. But in terms of what we do, we'll help you stand up the network, but we're not necessarily focused on network security afterwards, but happy to get back with that from what folks are doing out there in the field. All right, broadband adoption. So we've established in a perfect world, everybody has access to broadband, everybody can afford broadband, but that still doesn't help folks understand how to use it, right? I wanted to point out, two veins here of broadband adoption. There's the consumer side of things, where there's connected devices, telehealth, continuing education, aging in home, things we identified earlier. But there's also the business side of things, agriculture and farming, telemedicine, competing online, helping small businesses. And to highlight some of the things as far as strategies to assist with broadband adoption, I put up there kind of begrudgingly at the top that not everybody has a kid or a grandchild to help them walk through the process of figuring out how to use that new device that they just bought. Last Christmas, we gave my grandmother an iPad for the first time. She's had it for a year and a half now. She has mastered sending text messages to me from the iPad, right? I get one about once every 2 or 3 days, checking in, saying hi. But when it comes to anything beyond texting on that iPad, we're still helping her figure out how to use it, how to get online, how to shop online, which might be dangerous, but still a valuable thing that we want her to be able to figure out how to do. And then this is also something that folks are getting into out in the field as well. We've seen partnerships with public libraries. When we get in an application to the VADI program, a lot of the times those applications will have library programs to help folks figure out how to use broadband once they have access to it, baked into that strategy for community adoption. Promote existing programs, and then also, don't forget about young people as well. I hear a lot of folks reference in the early 2000s classes at community college to help folks figure things out like Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, or closer to when the internet was, the internet, right? But don't forget about young people too as well for job preparations and helping them become digitally literate as well. I wanted to highlight a couple of things that are going on out there now. I would encourage you to look at the City of Louisville's programs when it comes to digital adoption, digital literacy. And they highlight 4 key recommendations when it comes to this. It says establish an inventory of local digital literacy efforts. These are the things that the community and your communities likely already have going on. That could be with the library program. It could be what's going on in the public school systems. How are the education systems helping kids understand how to use whatever the new cool thing is in the tech world. A lot of conversations about coding out there right now. So establish an inventory of local digital literacy efforts. Explore opportunities to create digital presence for vulnerable populations. So that speaks for itself. In the city of Louisville, they were establishing programs in primarily minority communities to help them understand the value of getting online for job searching, and things of that nature. Last 2 things: facilitate digital literacy and digital skills course offerings. That involves, and they use their library system to promote this, getting out into the community, helping folks get online, access what we talked about with job platforms, Indeed, Glass Ceiling, and those sorts of things. And then lastly, encourage deployment of employment-focused digital skill training programs. So again, helping folks understand once they have access, once they can afford broadband, how do we actually use it and take advantage of what we have now out there in the field. So that was a quick summary of the 3 prongs of broadband access, affordability, adoption. Happy to take more questions here and then see what folks have asked online. That's great.
Okay, I see we have a couple questions online, but first I wanted to see if there were any in person. I know we've been kind of asking, couple.
Yeah.
So we're talking about putting a lot of fiber in the ground. Are we also talking about fiber for home, or we're talking fiber for neighborhood, fiber for with the hearing?
So if I understand the question, you're wondering if we're still talking about actual fiber directly to the home, and if we're still focused on that. You want me to?
If you want, yeah, today, yeah, sure.
We're absolutely still focused on directly connecting homes. A number of our applications that came in this year, actually, the majority of them, I believe, were fiber to the home applications. So we're not just talking about, at the end of the neighborhood or bringing it within the town. We're actually talking about directly connecting homes, businesses, CAIs. So let me just make sure I understand the question and to repeat it online, unless Okay. So I think the question was, are we allowing competition, basically, other providers to come in and not just the incumbent? Was that, sure.
Yeah, and to shed some light on that, I mean, communities will take that in different directions, right? In some cases, it makes sense for them to work with a local provider, that's already existing in towns and cities in that county and partner with them and build out to that new area. In other instances, they want to bring somebody else in, for reputation of the folk or reputation of the incumbent that's already in the town or city, or just to, create some competition, like you were saying. We find that, we're not gonna, our program is not structured to overbuild networks that are already out there, right? So, we don't promote competition in that way. But I think what you'd find in a lot of instances is that, once a company builds out into these rural areas through the grants that we provided, I would say a lot of them are going to also build out in the towns that they've built around as well, right? So, I mean, we don't directly create competition, but that might be a byproduct of what we're doing.
And I'll go ahead and read a couple of these online. So the first one is, when you are working with a broadband provider to expand access or bring new service to a housing structure, how do you ensure the provider offers a truly low-cost option for service?
Yeah, so I mean, to provide some light on that, I mean, a lot of our programs, and it doesn't matter, whether or not you're coming in for a last mile access project or not, it's important to realize that with all the funds that are out there, American Rescue Plan, this new infrastructure package, that localities are really in the driver's seat. And it's important to use those funds to your advantage when you're striking an agreement with a broadband provider. And this could be, in a housing development level, or it could be at a locality level. Use all the options on the table. If you want to make sure that a provider is offering a low-income option, put that as a condition in that agreement that you have with them. We see that all the time with folks coming in with grant applications. They've, in the process of finding a partner and solicitations, either put that in their solicitation saying they want somebody to offer a low-income service option, or when they're striking that agreement with them before they come into our program, they've got it in the contract with them that they are providing a service at X speeds at X cost for the life cycle of the project.
Got one back there?
Yeah, certainly, and I think that's going to be largely the same
Sorry,
thing.
do we want to repeat the question real quick? Sorry, hybrid conference. So I believe the question was, when you're kind of going into those negotiations, do you have sort of a baseline of what those pricing packages should be?
Yeah, and I would say too, there's two things. On the front end as well, I'd recommend a local government, ask a provider up front, hey, what are your packages? What are your pricing? Are those locked in over time, or do you see them, increasing once you've built out the network? And then secondly too, that's one thing we require in our evaluation criteria of grant programs. We want to see the packages that folks are offering in those localities. But yeah, I mean, just to be sure, just like making sure they offer a low-cost option, see what folks are going to be offering, and see how long that they're willing to lock in those offerings at that price.
The question is, how do you spell DSL? Okay, so we have another question online. The question is, what role can school systems play in broadband access, affordability, and adoption?
Yes, I mean, a huge role. I think that we were talking about this earlier, and when it comes to having a base of individuals you can access through sending out mailers, flyers, one of the better ways to do that is sending out a flyer home with a school child to be able to access the parent about whatever is going on at school that day. And there was legislation this past General Assembly session that allows providers to offer or advertise low-income service offerings through public school systems. So we've seen a few school systems take advantage of that in COVID, where a broadband provider that's already has a presence in the area sent home something through the school system to advertise a low-income service offering to get folks connected in the emergency period.
Yeah, I'll also add to that that school systems can actually be the driver in these applications. In fact, one of our applicants this year was in fact a school system rather than the locality. Exactly. So this year, the applicant was just one school system. But they came in with their partnered provider, just like all other applicants.
So are there funds in these programs to also provide end user equipment for the household?
So the question is, are there funds included to provide the end user equipment?
Yeah, so talking about state broadband expansion programs first, we've seen in some instances where counties have used local match dollars to pay for routers at the actual home location. So, yes, they're covering the expense of those routers that are required at home. There are other programs out there federally that are more catered towards devices. What comes to mind at first is the Emergency Connectivity Fund. That is a program structured like E-rate, where schools and libraries can apply for funding for their library patrons or school children off campus or not away from the library location to fund devices, fund routers, and anything that's needed in-home to actually use that broadband service going by their house.
Can you leverage that? In other words, that locality that you've got the broadband coming in and then leverage it for the because I'm assuming that bringing in the fiber, there may be some people who take advantage of that now, but now you're actually increasing the number of people who have access to that.
Sure. So I think if I understand correctly, the question is, can you leverage the infrastructure that's coming in for e-funding?
Yes, I think that's what's preferred, honestly. We prefer that these programs interact and talk to each other. If somebody was coming in for a last mile project, we hope they're working with a local library to be able to send a proposal in to Emergency Connectivity Fund or the traditional E-rate bucket of funding and say, hey, we've got last mile broadband access coming to us. Are there additional funds out there that we can access to put devices in homes? That's something we encourage actually in grant scoring criteria. If somebody is leveraging an additional program that's already out there as a part of this project, and they're putting routers and end user equipment in homes at reduced costs, we'll award additional points based on that through the body program.
And I just wanted to mention, following up on the end user equipment, this year in our 2022 guidelines, we made sure to really stress to people who were applying that we wanted them to include that last mile or that long drop connection. So we had experienced in some of our previous projects that providers were, bringing it to the driveway, but some people had exceptionally long driveways, particularly in rural communities. And so they were passing their driveway, but in order to actually connect their house, because it was such a long distance, it fell outside of their standard connection length. So it was going to cost that end user quite a bit of money. So we have tried to ease that in the 2022 guidelines by saying, for low to moderate income folks, we want those long drops included in the cost. We realize it's going to make your project more expensive, but that needs to be covered. There is also going to be a state program coming out to help ease those long drop connections as well.
Down, five up. Are they less competitive? Can they still participate in the program? In other words, understanding that you look at your LMI population in the locality and you say they have a low preference of high-speed internet in their home, but it is in the locality. You look at their LMI population is able to afford it. Can that locality fund get their incentive to bring fiber to the home? Maybe one gig.
Okay. So let me see if I understand the question. What you're asking is if there's service available in the locality, but the LMI folks are unable to afford the current service, are they included in the program?
I would understand that locality is competitive. If I understand that the locality and they have something like five, but that locality doesn't really qualify as lacking broadband. And so it's like a rank high. But if you then look under the curve, so well, yes, that service is available in the locality. When you look at the LMI in that locality, they're not connected. They're not participating. Does that still, does that locality still submit an application?
Okay, so, sorry, just to make sure. So what you're saying is if a locality has a number of LMI households and therefore wouldn't be able to afford the service or can't currently afford the service, does that make the locality less competitive, make their application less competitive?
If they're already 150
Right.
in that locality.
Mhm.
Right. So the way the body program is constructed is to deliver service to folks that don't currently have at least one option of internet service. And, even though the folks might have the opportunity to connect to 150 and 5, we would still consider that as a served location, meaning they'd be ineligible for the state grant funding as it's currently written.
Sure, so the question is, once we've reached our goal of ubiquitous access, universal access, by 2024, what do we see after that? Are we done, or, is there a new battle to fight?
This is the famous response that this question is above my pay grade. So just want to level set out there now. But I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. We hear from communities all the time that there's gaps in cellular coverage. If we fix the broadband problem, maybe we can go back and fix the cellular coverage gaps as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. Some of which was laid out here. I think there's opportunity for affordability programs, and then opportunity to help adoption as well. Department of Agriculture right now, VDAX, is looking at opportunities to help farmers adopt broadband service once they get it to the farm gate, and help them understand how they can use that for precision agriculture and things of that nature. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for us after we solve this current problem by 2024.
And I think we've hit our time here, so if there's any more questions, we could probably take one more, or we can head to the reception. Happy hour. All right, you are no longer the one between them and happy hour. All right, thank you all for joining. Could you hand me, I do have your challenge code. I'm sure the moment all of you have been waiting for. So if you're playing the challenge, the code is FRUP 7743, and I'll say it one more time. FRUP 7743. And once again, thank you guys for joining and for the engaging conversation.